Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know how we're always talking about thinking critically and really getting to the bottom of things? Well, today we're diving into what actually drives that kind of thinking. What gets us motivated to analyze stuff in the first place? What makes us want to go beyond just surface level understanding?
Right. Like what pushes us to really dissect and understand the information that's all around us all the time.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this really cool research article from Educational Psychology Review by Malail and Wigfield.
Published back in 2014.
Yeah, 2014. So our mission, if you will, is to figure out what motivates you to really think critically and why that even matters. Like, why is this type of thinking so important?
Yeah, and the article breaks down this connection between motivation and critical thinking in two main ways. First, there's this like quantitative aspect, the how much effort are we willing to put in? And then there's a qualitative side, like what kind of thinking do we just naturally prefer? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with that how much question, that quantitative relationship between motivation and critical thinking. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, I think it's important to remember that critical analytic thinking, it's not always like a walk in the park.
Hmm.
It can be pretty demanding. It takes energy, mental energy. So this quantitative aspect is all about, are you actually motivated enough to spend that mental energy? Like, are you willing to put in the effort to really grapple with a tough question or a complex idea?
Okay, that makes sense. And there are a bunch of factors that play into whether we're willing to put in that effort. The article talks about our beliefs, our values, and our goals. Let's start with the belief part, like believing in our own abilities. What's going on there?
Yeah, so it's really a combination of a few things. It's about how you see your overall abilities. It's about self-efficacy, that belief that you can actually take the steps to get something done. And it's about your expectations for success. Do you think you're going to be able to do it? And how much control do you feel you have over the outcome? All of that kind of feeds into whether you're going to put in the effort. There's a ton of research on this from people like Eccles and Wigfield who really dove into how our expectations and values shape our motivation. And then Bandura, his work on self-efficacy is really important here too.
So basically, if you believe you can figure something out, even if it's difficult, you're more likely to dive in and just keep trying, even when it gets tough.
Right. That belief in your capability, it's a huge motivator. It pushes you to take on challenging tasks and not give up when you hit a roadblock. And if you don't believe you can handle it, you're probably less likely to put in the effort for deep analysis in the first place, right?
Hmm.
Think of it like a puzzle. If you think you can solve it, you're much more likely to sit there and actually try.
Yeah, makes sense. So building that I can do this feeling is really important. Okay, so let's move on to values. The article calls these achievement task values. What are those all about?
So these are the reasons why you might actually want to do something, why you'd be motivated to engage in a certain activity. Eccles and his colleagues, they broke this down into four key components. First, is it interesting to you? We call this interest value. Second, is it important for who you are or what you want to achieve? This is attainment value. Third, is it useful? Will it help you in the future? This is utility value. And then finally, what do you have to give up to do it? And this is the cost part of the equation.
So it makes sense that if you find something genuinely fascinating, you're naturally going to want to think more deeply about it. That's the interest value, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of research supporting that. People like Heedy and Renninger looked at how interest develops, and Sheffield did some really interesting work on why we get engaged in what we read. Both highlight how important interest is for driving deeper thinking. But it's not always about whether something's fun or not.
Right, because sometimes you might work on something, even if it's not that exciting, just because you know it'll be helpful down the road. That's that utility value kicking in, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be a really powerful motivator too.
Yeah.
Like Holoman and Harakovich, they did some research on science education and found that when students understood how science concepts were relevant to their lives, when they saw the real world use, they were way more engaged and they learned better.
Yeah.
And we can't forget about that cost component either. Sometimes even if something is valuable to us, we might decide that the time and effort it takes, especially compared to other things we could be doing, just isn't worth it.
Yeah, no, I do that all the time. Sometimes, you just take the easy road, even if you know deep down that the harder one might be better in the long run.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about believing in yourself and valuing the task. What about goals? What role do our goals play in all of this?
Well, goals give us that sense of direction. Researchers talk about specific goals, things like finishing a certain page or a chapter, or maybe a longer-term goal, like completing a whole project. And then there are these broader ways that we tend to approach goals, like our general goal orientation. Zimmerman, for example, has done a lot of work looking at how we set and manage our goals. And what's interesting is that having both those immediate steps and the bigger picture in mind really helps us stay motivated.
So, like, having a smaller, clear goal, maybe like understand the main point of a paragraph, and then linking that to a bigger goal, like understanding the whole article,
Yeah.
that helps keep you focused and on track.
Precisely. And the article really digs into this idea of mastery goals versus performance goals. This is something that's been explored a lot by folks like Dweck and Leggett, Elliott, and many others.
Right, like wanting to learn and get better at something, that's a mastery goal, versus wanting to show how smart you are or maybe beat other people, that's more of a performance goal. So how do these different types of goals actually influence our critical thinking?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for you, for your own learning. Mastery goals are really closely connected to what we call deep processing. That means, really trying to understand the material, making connections to what you already know, thinking about things in your own unique way. And deep processing, that's what critical analytic thinking is all about. So when your goal is to learn and grow, to really understand something, you're more likely to put in the effort it takes to get there.
And the research backs that up.
Yeah, Elliott and Senko, for example, have done some really fascinating work showing this link between mastery goals and deeper processing. So here's the takeaway for you. Instead of just focusing on getting a good grade, try shifting your focus to truly understanding the material. Honestly, it can make learning a lot more enjoyable and effective in the long run.
Right, because when you're focused on understanding, you're naturally going to think in a way that helps you get there. So what about performance goals then? How do those impact our thinking?
Well, performance goals often lead to more surface-level processing. Like you might focus on just memorizing facts or getting the right answers without really grasping the deeper meaning.
Kind of like cramming for a test and then forgetting everything the next day.
Yeah, exactly. And the article points out that this can be a problem, especially in education. The way we test learning often focuses on just showing what you know, which might actually encourage this more superficial approach instead of that deep understanding we need for real critical thinking.
Oh, I see. Like the way we're testing might actually be pushing people away from deeper thinking, even if they're trying to learn.
Right. And researchers like Senko and Pinterich, they suggest that if we change the way we assess learning, if we focused on measuring deep understanding, it could actually encourage more students to think more critically, even those who are really driven by performance goals.
So, if we reward true understanding, people are more likely to learn in a way that leads to understanding. That's a pretty cool idea. Um, the outline also mentions something about approach and avoidance when it comes to goals. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So with both mastery and performance goals, you can either be focused on approaching a positive outcome or avoiding a negative one. So with performance goals, you might be trying to do better than others, that's performance approach, or you might be trying to avoid looking bad, that's performance avoidance. And then with mastery goals, you could be focused on improving your understanding, mastery approach, or you might be trying to avoid losing skills or not fully grasping something, that's mastery avoidance. And what's interesting is that Elliott and McGregor and Zusho, they found that mastery avoidance, that fear of not understanding, can sometimes lead to anxiety, which can make deep thinking even harder because you're also dealing with that worry on top of everything else.
So, like if you're super worried about not understanding something, it's going to be hard to actually focus on understanding it.
Okay, so to wrap up this how much side of things, it seems like believing in your abilities, valuing what you're learning, and setting goals focused on understanding and growth, all of those things play a big role in how much mental effort we're willing to put into thinking critically.
Absolutely. That willingness to put in the effort, that's like the foundation. But sometimes it's not just about how much effort we can put in, it's also about what kind of thinking we naturally prefer, which brings us to that qualitative side of motivation.
Right, so this qualitative side is about whether we naturally gravitate towards critical analytic thinking or other styles of thinking. What are some of the other styles the article mentions? Well, they talk about associative thinking and divergent thinking specifically. Divergent thinking is all about generating lots of different ideas, thinking outside the box. It's a key part of creativity. Guilford and Runco, they did a lot of work on divergent thinking. Convergent thinking, on the other hand, is more about logically connecting ideas to find the best solution. That's a lot closer to critical analytic thinking. So when we're talking about this qualitative aspect of motivation, we're really asking, what kind of thinking do you just naturally enjoy? Like, do you love taking things apart and analyzing them, or do you prefer brainstorming and coming up with new ideas? It's about what feels more natural to you.
So it's kind of like the difference between brainstorming a bunch of possibilities and then solving a puzzle where there's one right answer.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And, we often assume that analytical thinking is always more difficult than just coming up with ideas, but that's not always true. Sometimes coming up with truly original, creative ideas can be just as mentally demanding as deep analysis.
Interesting. So our own personal preference for a certain style of thinking can actually influence whether we engage in critical analysis. And this is where regulatory focus theory comes into play, right?
Yeah, exactly. Regulatory focus theory, which was developed by Higgins, it suggests that we all have these fundamental drives, like the drive for growth and achievement, what we call a promotion focus, and the drive for safety and security, what we call a prevention focus. And these basic needs actually shape how we go after our goals, how we approach different situations. Like, imagine you're planning a trip. Are you more focused on having exciting adventures, trying new things? That would be more of a growth promotion focus. Or are you more concerned with making sure everything is safe and well planned out? That would be more of a security prevention focus.
Oh, I see. So like a promotion focus would be more about what can I gain from this? And a prevention focus would be more about how can I avoid messing this up?
Right. And that core difference, it influences how we approach things in all areas of our lives, including how we think.
So someone who's really focused on growth is going to approach thinking differently than someone who's more focused on security. What would those differences look like?
Okay, so a promotion focus, it leads to what we call eager strategies. People with this focus, they're all about seeking out gains, they're more flexible in their thinking, and they often rely more on associative thinking, making connections between different ideas. They're okay with taking risks and exploring different possibilities, even if it means making some mistakes along the way.
So that sounds like it would be really helpful for brainstorming and coming up with new ideas.
Exactly. On the flip side, those with a prevention focus, they use what we call vigilant strategies. Their main goal is to avoid making mistakes or losing something, so they tend to be more careful and systematic in their thinking. They really value getting things right, and they're not as likely to jump to conclusions.
So they're more about accuracy and being thorough.
Exactly. And there's some really cool research that shows how these different focuses play out in real life. Like Crow and Higgins, they did a study on memory and found that people with a promotion focus were more likely to say they had seen something before, even if they hadn't. They had more hits, but they also had more false alarms.
So they were more likely to say, yes, I've seen that, just in case.
Right. While those with a prevention focus, they were better at correctly rejecting things they hadn't actually seen. They had more correct rejections, but they also missed some things they had actually seen.
Because they were being extra cautious.
Exactly. It's like the promotion group is focused on not missing any potential opportunities, even if it means making some mistakes, while the prevention group is all about avoiding errors, even if it means being a little overly cautious. And, these differences also show up in how we come up with creative ideas. Research by Lieberman and others has shown that a promotion focus tends to lead to more ideas and more original ideas because that focus on potential gains encourages exploration. But on the other hand, work by Herman and Ryder Paulman suggests that a prevention focus is linked to a more careful evaluation of the quality of those ideas.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of like quantity versus quality. Promotion might lead to more ideas, but prevention might lead to better ideas.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it even affects how fast we work and how accurate we are. Studies by Abnett and Sellier and Forrester and colleagues, they've shown that people with a promotion focus tend to work faster, which can be helpful for catching obvious errors, while those with a prevention focus, they're more focused on accuracy, and they're better at finding those subtle errors that require more careful analysis.
Makes sense. So does this apply to how we handle schoolwork and stuff like that too?
Absolutely. Like Miele and his team, they did a study on reading comprehension and found that when students encountered something confusing, those with a prevention focus were more likely to reread to make sure they understood it. And guess what? They ended up with a better grasp of the material.
So that careful double-checking mindset actually helped them learn better.
Exactly. And Rosenzweig and Miele, they even found that a prevention focus was linked to higher scores on the SAT, especially on those sections that require more careful analytical thinking and aren't strictly timed.
Wow. So it seems like sometimes preferring that critical analytic thinking style, it's not just about being willing to put in the effort, it's about having that underlying tendency towards being careful and vigilant in how you process information, that drive to be accurate and avoid mistakes.
Exactly. And I think it's important to understand how this regulatory focus idea is different from the other motivational concepts we talked about.
Right. So, how is regulatory focus different from those approach and avoidance goals we talked about earlier?
Well, Scullin and Higgins, they make a really important distinction here.
Mm.
They say that approach and avoidance goals are about the outcome you're aiming for, whether you're trying to achieve something positive or avoid something negative. But regulatory focus, it's more about the strategy you use to get there. It's about how you go about pursuing your goals. Are you eagerly chasing gains, or are you vigilantly trying to prevent losses? Like, you could have a goal of getting an A in a class, but
Yeah.
you could go about it in different ways. You could adopt a promotion focus and seek out extra credit opportunities, or maybe try to impress the teacher with your insights. Or you could adopt a prevention focus and just meticulously study to make sure you don't fail any tests.
Oh, that makes sense. It's not just about what you want to achieve, it's about how you go about achieving it.
Right.
So, what about mastery versus performance goals then? How does regulatory focus relate to those?
It's a similar idea. Mastery and performance goals, they describe what you're trying to achieve, learning for the sake of learning versus showing off your abilities. But regulatory focus, it describes how you go about reaching those goals. So you could have a mastery goal, like really wanting to understand a certain topic, but you could approach it with a promotion focus by eagerly seeking out new information and trying to connect it to everything you know. Or you could approach it with a prevention focus by carefully making sure you don't misunderstand anything and double-checking everything you learn. And the same goes for performance goals. You could be trying to get the best grade in the class, but you could do that with a promotion focus by trying to stand out and impress everyone. Or you could do it with a prevention focus by making sure you don't make any mistakes.
Oh, so it's like layering those two things on top of each other. You have your goal, and then you have your approach to achieving that goal.
Exactly.
Okay, last clarification then. How does regulatory focus relate to that whole idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation?
All right, so Dissy and Ryan, they did a lot of work on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and their focus was on the source of motivation. Is it coming from within you, the enjoyment of the activity itself, or is it coming from some external reward? Regulatory focus, it's not about the source, it's more about the strategic orientation, how you approach that motivation. Like, imagine a student who's extrinsically motivated to get a good GPA. They could use a promotion strategy by taking easier classes to boost their average, or they could use a prevention strategy by focusing on the most challenging required courses to make sure they don't fail any. And what's interesting is that the article points out that intrinsic motivation and mastery goals, they often have similar effects to a promotion focus in that they tend to lead to deeper processing.
Okay, that's really helpful for understanding why we might approach different learning situations in such different ways. Now, the article also talks about how the context around us, our environment, can influence our motivation and our tendency to think critically.
Right.
So tell me more about that. Like, how does context play a role in all of this?
Oh, context is huge. Researchers like Nolan and Ward and Perry and colleagues, they really emphasize how important our learning environments are. Things like how classrooms are set up, how grading works, the kind of feedback we get, all of that can shape what motivates us to think deeply.
Yeah, like a classroom where it's okay to make mistakes and you're encouraged to learn from them, that's probably going to create a different kind of motivation than a classroom where you feel like you have to be perfect all the time.
Exactly. And the article highlights some really interesting examples of how we can actually change these contexts to promote deeper thinking. Like, think about Carol Dweck's work on mindsets. The idea that intelligence is either fixed or it can grow. She's shown that teaching students that their abilities can actually improve through effort and learning, what we call a growth mindset, that can have a really positive impact on their motivation and even their grades, especially in subjects that are often seen as difficult, like math.
So believing you can get better actually makes you more motivated to try.
Exactly. And another big factor is how relevant we perceive what we're learning to be. Like, how useful is this information to my life and my goals? Ryan and Deasy's self-determination theory and Wigfield and colleagues' expectancy value theory, they both emphasize how important perceived relevance is for boosting interest and engagement. Like Holman and Harakovich, they did a study where they had students write about why science was relevant to their lives, and it actually led to those students being more interested in science and getting better grades, especially for students who didn't think they were very good at science to begin with. So making those connections to the real world, that can be a huge motivator.
Definitely. The outline also mentions something called concept-oriented reading instruction, KORI. What
Yes.
is that?
So Korai is a pretty comprehensive approach to teaching reading that was developed by Guthrie and his colleagues. And what they did was they combined teaching reading strategies with creating a really motivating learning environment. So they focus on making reading relevant, giving students choices in what they read, providing interesting materials, helping them feel confident in their reading abilities, and encouraging collaboration.
Sounds very holistic.
Right? And studies have shown that this approach can significantly improve both motivation and reading comprehension, probably because it encourages students to engage with the text in a more active and analytical way.
So it's not just about teaching them how to read, it's about creating an environment where they actually want to read and think deeply about what they're reading.
Exactly.
Okay, so creating a supportive and engaging environment is key for fostering deep thinking. Now, how does our environment influence whether we adopt more of a growth mindset or a security mindset, that promotion or prevention focus we were talking about earlier?
Right. So Higgins' regulatory focus theory suggests that what we focus on at any given moment is influenced by both our past experiences and our current environment. If you grew up in a place where mistakes were heavily punished, you might naturally develop a stronger prevention focus. But even temporary things can shift our focus. Like being asked to think about our hopes and dreams. That can trigger a promotion focus. Or being asked to think about our responsibilities and obligations. That can trigger a prevention focus. Even the way a task is presented, or the types of rewards that are offered, can nudge us in one direction or the other. Like contexts that emphasize individuality and achieving great things, those might encourage a promotion focus, while contexts that stress the importance of fitting in and avoiding errors, those might lead to a prevention focus.
So, like, different situations can bring out different sides of us.
Exactly. And there's even research showing that being aware of negative stereotypes about a group you belong to can actually improve your analytical thinking in some cases, because it triggers that more vigilant, prevention-focused state.
Oh, wow. That's kind of counterintuitive, but it makes sense. Like, if you feel like you're being judged or scrutinized, you're going to be extra careful and analytical.
Right.
Okay, so the article also talks about creating a motivational fit with the task demands. What does that mean?
This is the idea that you're going to be more successful if your current motivational state aligns with what the task actually requires. So, for example, if you're brainstorming, where you need to be creative and come up with lots of possibilities, a promotion focus, that openness to new ideas and flexible thinking, that's going to be really helpful.
Hmm.
But if you're working on a logic puzzle or trying to carefully evaluate an argument, then a prevention focus, with that emphasis on accuracy and analysis, that's going to be more beneficial. So different tasks might actually call for different motivational mindsets.
So it's about being strategic and realizing that different types of thinking are better suited to different situations and different mindsets.
Exactly. And the article suggests that teachers, or even you yourself, can try to intentionally create these states. Like, before a brainstorming session, a teacher might ask students to think about their most exciting goals. And then when they move to evaluating those ideas, the teacher might shift the focus to potential problems or challenges.
Oh, interesting. So you can prime people to be in a particular mindset. And what was that term you used earlier? Metamotivational sensitivity.
Yes. So metamotivational sensitivity is about how aware you are of which motivational state is going to be most helpful for you on different tasks. Like, do you realize that being in a careful, prevention-focused state might be better for proofreading a document, while a more open, promotion-focused state might be better for coming up with creative solutions to a problem?
So it's like being self-aware of your own motivational tendencies and knowing how to use them to your advantage.
Right.
Okay, this has been a really fascinating discussion. To kind of bring it all together, what would you say are the key takeaways here? What do we really need to remember about motivation and critical thinking?
I think the main thing is to realize that motivation isn't just one thing. It's this complex interplay of your beliefs about yourself, what you value, the goals you set, and how you go about pursuing those goals.
Mm,
And all of these factors influence not just how much effort you're willing to put into thinking critically, but also the style of thinking you prefer.
it's so much more than just saying someone is motivated or not.
Right. It's about understanding all these different pieces and how they work together. And by understanding those tendencies in yourself, you can become a much more strategic and effective learner and thinker.
Absolutely. So, as you go about your day to day, think about the tasks you find the most challenging. Maybe even the ones you kind of dread doing. Could understanding your own motivational tendencies, like are you more driven by seeking opportunities or avoiding problems? What kind of goals do you usually set for yourself? Could understanding those things and thinking about the demands of the task help you approach those tasks in a different way and maybe even be more successful? What cues in your environment might be subtly influencing your focus without you even realizing it? And how can you become more aware of those influences?
Those are great questions to reflect on.
Yeah. And if this deep dive has piqued your interest, I encourage you to do some more exploring on your own. Think about your own learning experiences in light of what we've discussed today. Maybe even look into some of the researchers and theories we mentioned. There's a whole world of knowledge out there just waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep thinking deeply.